The Tower of London has never been a quiet place. Even today, when tourists walk through its stone gates with cameras in their hands, there is something heavy in the air. The walls are too old, the windows too narrow, the shadows too deep. It is not hard to imagine footsteps echoing through the corridors at night, or a whispered order passing from one guard to another. The tower has seen kings, queens, prisoners, traitors, executions, and secrets. But among all the stories trapped inside its walls, few are as haunting as the story of two young boys who went in and were never seen again. They were not ordinary children. The older boy was Edward, only 12 years old. He was supposed to become King Edward V of England. His younger brother, Richard, Duke of York, was around 9. They were the sons of King Edward IV, a powerful and popular ruler from the House of York. Their family had already survived years of civil war, betrayal, and bloodshed. England had been torn apart by the Wars of the Roses, a bitter struggle between two branches of the royal family, York and Lancaster. By the time the two princes were born, peace seemed possible, but in England's royal court, peace was often just another word for waiting. When King Edward IV died suddenly in April 1483, everything changed. His eldest son, Edward, was away from London at the time. He was young, but he was the rightful heir. Plans were made for his coronation. The country expected a boy king, guided by trusted adults until he was old enough to rule. His uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector. That title made him the most powerful man in England while the young king remained a child. At first, it may have seemed like a normal arrangement. A royal child needed protection. The kingdom needed order. But royal protection can sometimes look very much like control. Edward began his journey to London for his coronation. He traveled with members of his mother's family, the Woodvilles, who had gained power and influence during Edward IV's reign. Richard of Gloucester did not trust them. Many nobles did not trust them either. They believed the Woodvilles were trying to control the young king and rule through him. Richard acted quickly. He intercepted Edward's party before they reached London. Some of the boy's companions were arrested. Others were removed from his side. Edward himself was taken under Richard's control. Officially, it was done for his safety. Officially, everything was still moving toward a coronation. But from that moment, the boy king was no longer free. He was brought to the Tower of London. That may sound terrifying now, because the Tower is remembered as a prison. But at the time, it was also a royal residence, and kings traditionally stayed there before their coronation. So when Edward entered the Tower, people may not have immediately feared the worst. He was a child waiting to be crowned. The ceremony was expected. England was watching. Then Richard, the younger brother, was brought there too. Their mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had taken sanctuary in Westminster Abbey with her daughters and younger son. She must have sensed the danger. She had lived close enough to power to know how quickly loyalty could turn into survival. Richard of Gloucester wanted the younger prince with his brother in the Tower. After pressure and persuasion, Elizabeth gave him up. It is hard to imagine that moment without feeling the coldness of it. A mother handing over her child, perhaps telling herself that refusing would only make things worse, perhaps hoping that because they were royal, because they were children, because the eyes of England were on them, they would be safe. The two boys were now together inside the Tower. For a short time, they were seen playing in the grounds. There were reports of them shooting arrows, walking in the garden, appearing at windows. They were children, after all. Whatever storm was forming around them, they may not have fully understood it. Edward might have known more. At 12, he was old enough to sense fear in adults, old enough to notice when servants became quieter, when familiar faces disappeared, when promises kept being delayed. The coronation did not happen. It was postponed, then postponed again. Rumors began to move through London. Suddenly, the question was no longer when Edward would be crowned. It was whether he had the right to be crowned at all. A claim appeared that Edward IV's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid, because he had supposedly been promised to another woman before marrying her. If that were true, then their children were illegitimate. Edward and Richard would have no claim to the throne. It was a convenient argument. Too convenient, some would say. Parliament accepted it. The boys were declared illegitimate. Their uncle Richard, once their protector, took the crown for himself. He became King Richard III, and the princes remained inside the tower. After that, their appearances became fewer. People who had once seen them around the tower no longer saw them. The boys seemed to vanish deeper into the building, swallowed by stone and silence. One report said the older prince spent his days in prayer, as if he knew something terrible was coming. Whether that detail is true or not, it has stayed with the story because it feels painfully believable. By late 1483, the princes had disappeared from public view completely. No official announcement explained it. No funeral was held. No bodies were shown. No royal statement said they had died of illness. They were simply gone. In a world where royal births, marriages, coronations, and deaths were political events, the silence was strange. Children who had once stood near the center of England's future had vanished, and the people in power acted as if questions were dangerous. So the questions survived. What happened to the princes in the tower? For centuries, the most common suspicion has fallen on Richard III. He had the clearest motive. As long as Edward and his brother lived, Richard's throne was not secure. Even if they had been declared illegitimate, there would always be people willing to use them as symbols of rebellion. A living prince is more dangerous than a dead one. A child with royal blood can become a banner for armies. Richard also had access. The boys were held in the tower while he controlled the government. If anyone could order their deaths and bury the truth, it was him. But history is rarely kind enough to give us a simple answer. There is no surviving order signed by Richard, no confession written in the moment, no record that proves exactly when or how the boys died. Much of what people believe comes from later accounts, especially from writers who lived under the Tudor dynasty, the family that defeated Richard and had every reason to paint him as a monster. One of the most famous versions came from Sir Thomas More, writing years later. He claimed that Richard ordered the murder of the princes, and that two men smothered the boys in their beds. According to that account, the children were buried secretly beneath a staircase. It is a chilling story, and it shaped the way generations imagined the crime. But More was not an eyewitness. His account may have been based on rumors, political storytelling, or sources we can no longer test. William Shakespeare later turned Richard III into one of literature's great villains, twisted, ruthless, hungry for power, capable of killing children without losing sleep. The play made the image unforgettable, but drama is not the same as evidence. Still, even if the details are uncertain, the suspicion remains. Richard's defenders argue that blaming him may be too easy. They point out that Henry Tudor, who later became Henry VII, also benefited from the princes being dead. Henry defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth in 1485 and took the throne. His claim was not especially strong. If Edward V or his brother were alive, they had a better claim than Henry did. That means Henry also had a motive. If the boys were still alive when Henry came to power, their existence would have threatened his new dynasty. Some believe Henry may have had them killed, or at least had reason to keep their fate hidden. Others suggest the Duke of Buckingham, once Richard's ally and later his enemy, may have been involved. Buckingham had ambition of his own, and in the dangerous politics of the time, ambition could turn men into murderers. Then there are the stranger possibilities. Maybe one or both princes escaped. Maybe they were hidden. Maybe they lived under false identities. Years later, men appeared claiming to be one of the lost princes. The most famous was Perkin Warbeck, who claimed to be Richard, Duke of York. He gained support in Europe and caused serious trouble for Henry VII. Was he truly the younger prince? Most historians believe he was an impostor, but the fact that his claim was taken seriously shows how powerful the mystery remained. People did not know what had happened, and because they did not know, almost anything seemed possible. The tower kept its secret for nearly 200 years. Then, in 1674, workers at the tower discovered a wooden box buried beneath a staircase. Inside were the bones of two children. The discovery immediately stirred old fears. Many believed the remains belonged to Edward and Richard. The location seemed to fit the old story. The bones were later placed in Westminster Abbey, treated as the remains of the lost princes. But even that did not end the mystery. The bones have never been conclusively identified by modern science. Without proper DNA testing, no one can say for certain that they are the princes. They could be, they might not be. The tower is old, and old buildings keep many dead. That uncertainty is part of what makes the story so unsettling. If the bones are theirs, then the princes probably died young, hidden away in the place where they were meant to wait for a coronation. If the bones are not theirs, then the question becomes even darker. Where did they go? What makes the disappearance of the princes in the tower so powerful is not only the possibility of murder. History is full of murder. Kings killed rivals, brothers betrayed brothers, nobles changed sides when it suited them. The 15th century was not gentle. What makes this story different is their age. Edward and Richard were children caught inside the machinery of power. They were born into a world where bloodline was everything. But being royal did not protect them. It made them valuable. It made them dangerous. Their names, their faces, their very existence became a problem for grown men fighting over a crown. Imagine the tower at night, the river moving black outside the walls, guards passing with lanterns, doors locking, the city breathing beyond the stone. Somewhere inside, two boys waiting for news. Perhaps they still believed they would leave. Perhaps they asked when their mother would come. Perhaps the older one tried to comfort the younger. Perhaps they heard footsteps stop outside their chamber. The most frightening part is that we do not know. We do not know whether they died together. We do not know whether they were afraid. We do not know who gave the order, who carried it out, or who helped bury the truth afterward. All we know is that two boys entered the tower during one of the most dangerous moments in English history, and then they vanished. Richard III ruled for only 2 years before he was killed at Bosworth. Henry VII built a new dynasty from the ruins. The Wars of the Roses ended, at least officially. England moved on. New kings came, new wars began. The tower continued to stand, but the missing princes never really left it. Their story lingers because it sits between history and ghost story. There are enough facts to make it real, and enough silence to make it unbearable. Every theory opens another door, but none leads fully into the light. Richard may have done it. Henry may have hidden the truth. Buckingham may have played his own deadly game. The boys may have died in their beds, or somewhere else, or not when people think they did. The tower gives no answer. It only keeps standing. And somewhere in its long shadow, the two young heirs of England remain exactly where history left them, waiting behind a locked door, caught forever between a crown they never wore and a mystery no one has ever solved.